great to be with you today. I'm going to be continuing with some of the assessments that I've been giving on coronavirus, and excited to share with you as the Sattler school year winds down how many of us are thinking about the current situation that we're in. So on this slide here just shows the latest numbers in terms of official COVID-19 cases. This is as of this morning, May 14th, 2020. And what you can see here is on the left, the global cases is about 4.5 million. Deaths are approximately 300,000. In the United States, we have about 1.4 million cases and then about 85,000 deaths. The good news, however, despite the very tragic statistics that I just showed you, is that daily new cases are on the decline. And I think you can see here from this diagram that there's indeed a generally downward running slope to these new cases. So that's certainly good to see. Probably the biggest learning that we've had of the last, let's see here, how do I turn this off? Oh, there we go. The biggest learning that we've had of the last month, though, from the medical journals involves what's called the case fatality rate. So what is the case fatality rate? It is simply your chance of dying if you become infected with the virus. And so the equation is shown right here. It's just the number of people who die due to COVID-19 divided by the number of people infected with the virus. So it's a simple fraction. It's much more difficult to determine the denominator, the bottom number, than it is the top number. So the numerator, you can imagine having a better way to estimate that. People come into the hospital, they get checked, they get diagnosed there, and a physician can record on the death certificate what happened that led to the person's demise. However, you can imagine it's much more difficult to estimate how many people have actually been infected with the virus. And the reason is what if the person's asymptomatic? What if the individual was never tested for whatever reason? So the denominator has proved much more difficult to estimate historically. Just to calibrate you, ordinary influenza is thought to have a case fatality rate of about 0.1%. So that's about 1 in 1,000 people. The original CFR, or case fatality rate of COVID-19, was first thought to be 3.4%. And then as more data came in, the revised number was 1%. But now what we have is more testing of random samples of people. And so what we've done, what the scientific community has done, is gone out and measured people as close to randomly as they can do, and then check their blood, not for whether they currently have the infection, but whether they've had the infection in the past. So this is an extremely valuable way to ascertain this denominator here, which is how many people have been infected with the virus. There's many studies that have come out on this in the last 3 to 4 weeks. This particular study came out of Stanford University, and they measured samples from Santa Clara County. And what you can see here is when they measured here, the key parameter that they found was right here, that they found that it ranged between 2.5% to 4% in terms of population prevalence of COVID-19. So let's call it about 3% of people had already had the virus. And this was a much, much higher number than was expected. And in fact, you can see here that was 50 to 85-fold more than the number of confirmed cases where they actually had someone come in to the hospital and get tested for active viral infection. So what that means is that our denominator is larger. More people have had the infection than previously thought. We've had other studies that have shown this as well. This is a completely different study from the East Coast. This is from New York City. And you can see here also using antibodies. So this looks at if you've had infection in the past. And look at this. If you're in New York City, 21% of the population there is estimated to have had the virus. So much, much higher than estimates previously thought based on some of the real-time PCR studies that were done. There have been other studies that have been done in Miami and Massachusetts, globally, that have found in general the numbers have been higher than expected. So now we can ask the question, what are the implications on the case fatality rate, or CFR? And from that same paper I showed you before from Stanford, the new estimate that they generated was between 0.01 and 0.2. So 0.1 to 0.2. So between 1 in 1,000 and 2 in 1,000, which hopefully you recall is much closer to the number that is associated with influenza. Now, there have been other estimates of the CFR that have been in the same range, some as high as 0.5%, 5 in 1,000. But generally speaking, we're converging on much lower numbers than previously thought, as we have much better data independently collected from multiple cities and geographies. So overall, this is very good news. This means that the virus that we're facing now, the coronavirus that we're facing, which is officially called SARS-CoV-2, has a case fatality rate that's much lower than previously thought, much closer to influenza. And so now what we can do is we can ask the statisticians and the epidemiologists to update their models to much more accurately calculate the costs on both sides. And what do I mean by this? A lot of people have this misconception where they think, oh, what this is all about is just saving lives on the one side, and then on the other side, well, that's just about the economy. But it's really not that. And this is taking an expression from someone else who says it's not lives versus livelihoods, it's lives versus lives. And what do I mean by that? Well, right now, there are people out there who are supposed to be getting colonoscopies and PSAs and pap smears, and there's cancer patients who aren't getting chemotherapy because they're afraid to go to the hospital. That is undoubtedly costing lives to the healthcare system as well from a different disease. And so we need to calculate how many of patients out there are going to be harmed by continuing the lockdown and this general quarantine versus lives merely saved from diminishing the spread of the virus in that way. So this basic idea is called total harm minimization. And it simply says that every decision has costs and benefits, every single one. I don't envy being in the position of a policymaker or a governor or a president, because either way they decide, there's going to be people who die. That's just the reality. And what they have to do, and what they should do, is look at both scenarios as they make a decision and estimate the costs and the benefits with respect to human lives, mortality, and look at both scenarios and then make an informed decision there. Right now, we haven't seen as many people calculate in a disciplined way what is the cost of continuing the lockdown with respect to, as I mentioned before, cancer deaths or greater suicides, or as this slide shows here, this is an article from a paper that says, is from the New York Times. It says, instead of coronavirus, hunger will kill us as the global food crisis looms. This article goes on to talk about how the number of people facing acute hunger could rise to 265 million by the end of this year, 2020. So this implies many thousands, maybe even millions of people who could die from starvation if the economy continues to be shut down like it is right now. And so that's a massive cost of continuing the lockdown on that side. And so for this reason, we need to factor in the cost on that side. Now, on top of that, we actually have incrementally good news. It's not a game changer, but it's a modest improvement there. There was a clinical trial that read out on April 29th, so just very recently here, from a company called Gilead, and the drug is called remdesivir. And what they showed here was an improvement in number of hospital days. So in other words, if you get onto remdesivir, then you are going to be discharged more quickly from the hospital. And they did a very good study here. It was a randomized, placebo-controlled study. For those who know what that means, this is the highest quality study, unlike many of the more anecdotal studies that have been out there before. So this is really good news. And so now I think it becomes reasonable to discuss and even promote a risk-based quarantine model and open the country again. So given the recent learnings of the lower case fatality rate, which is much more comparable to the flu, given that we're getting better therapeutics and they're only going to get better just even in the next couple of months, policymakers could, and I would probably say should, open the economy now in measured but steady steps while keeping vulnerable populations, the older, sick, immunocompromised, protected until more therapeutics and ultimately vaccines come online. This is an example from an author named David Katz, who has proposed a specific way to stratify the society in terms of risk. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but basically stratifying people based on age, less than 60, 60 to 64, if they're a healthcare professional, or greater than age 75, and what could be done to rationally and reasonably reopen the economy and the country based on this kind of stratification. And I think this is exactly the type of direction that we need to be going down. In addition, this disease can be defeated. So I'm going to use a case study here of Japan. This country did not have a lockdown like we had in the US. Most businesses remained open, including subways. Yesterday, May 13th, the death total in Japan was 21 people. I mean, shockingly low. And this is an older nation. This is a country with a lot of older people in it. Total deaths from the virus since this has begun is 678. I mentioned in the US we've had about 85,000. Now you might say, what's the population of Japan? It's about 39% of ours. So if you were to do the math, you would calculate that Japan's death rate is 2% of what ours is. So this is pretty amazing. Why is this? Well, I've given talks in various places about masks, and I think the data are very compelling here. So if you look here at case trajectories here of countries that don't have masks, at least an early and aggressive and widespread policy of people using masks, you can see how those countries have fared. And then you can see over here how the countries that have had masks, how they have done. This is, I think, extremely compelling data. Now, this is not normalized by population. And so what I did was I prepared a graph that's shown here, looking at some of the more important examples of countries that have taken different policies and approaches towards handling COVID-19. And this is in a way that is presenting the data that factors in population. So it's deaths divided by million people in the country. So this is a way to compare across countries that have different populations. And so you can see Spain and Italy did the worst. They're very tragically. Here's the UK, here's France, here's Sweden, and the US is, to be precise, 260 deaths per million people here. So a bit better than some of these other countries in the West. Not quite as good as Germany. Germany is a tough country to beat in terms of their discipline there. But very interestingly, and this has not gained a lot of attention in the media, but this is the Czech Republic. And if you go online and just do a search for Czech Republic masks, you will find that they were way ahead of everybody else. And they had a grassroots movement from a widespread swaths of the population to adopt masks. And like I said, not so much in a heavy-handed central way, but more using videos and encouragement and getting people to adopt this of their own volition. You can see how low their death rate is. And if you want to be precise around this, you would find that the Czech Republic has about 1/10, 10%, the death rate of the United States. And then now we get into some of these countries where it was already more prevalent, the use of masks, and this continue to fortify that stance. So Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan. Just to give an illustration with Taiwan, Taiwan has a population of 25 million people, so not a huge place, but not tiny either. In the last week, they've had 0 cases. I didn't say deaths. They've had 0 cases there. And the day before that, a week ago, they had 1 case. So this is absolutely amazing. And I feel like in general, we have not lifted up some of these examples of countries that have done an excellent job at containing and diminishing the disease. The main difference between these two groups, as I said, is the use of masks. A lot of people ask, do you need them outside? Generally, I don't think you need them outside, especially if you have adequate distance there. I personally would advocate getting outside and going to parks, going on hikes, but in an indoor space, an airplane, a store, particularly where you're going to be close to other people, where air is going to be recirculated, at least for a little while, to use masks is prudent. Okay, what I want to do in the next 10, 15 minutes is talk about trends in a post-COVID-19 world. I'm going to aim my comments particularly at those who are interested in education and are following Sattler College for implications on the economy and Christianity from a global perspective. One of the main takeaways that I've been saying is that COVID-19 has really been more of an accelerant for previously existing trends. So things like cloud and cybersecurity, online e-commerce, the general demise of brick and mortar stores, telemedicine. I won't read this whole list here. But in general, these trends existed before COVID-19, and COVID-19 has accelerated their adoption. It has also created new trends as well. There's going to be a lot less business travel, in-person conferences, more staycations. A lot of people have found that they enjoy home cooking, baking bread. Deglobalization is very interesting. I think a lot of people have recognized how vulnerable many supply chains are. There's going to be more investments into virology and anti-infectives, which I think is badly needed. Probably less public transportation and ride sharing, new standards for hygiene and sanitation, and then electronic voting is also coming to the foreground as well. So I'm going to give you quickly here 7 themes that relate to those who are at Sattler College, who are considering the implications for what it's going to be like to be a worker, to be a citizen of whatever country you happen to be a part of, but in general, I'm going to be focusing here on the United States. So the first theme is deglobalization and the shortening of supply chains. So supply chains are how goods are moved from point A to point B. You can see here how they're going from raw materials to suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, retailers, consumers, and how that is been shown to be very weak here. This is a cartoon that I like where you can see these security personnel that are escorting this box of Charmin toilet paper. Just here in Boston, I've been checking my local CVS, my local pharmacy. I just went there yesterday. They still don't have toilet paper. They haven't had it for the last couple of months. It's pretty amazing how countries, even as powerful as the US, can't procure toilet paper, certainly not masks. It's a very interesting situation there. Supply chains, as we've seen, are very vulnerable to disruption. When you look here at how much of our imports come from China, you can see here that this dark green color here indicates that we draw a lot from China. And in some sense, the US has almost merged its economy with China. And one of the things that I think has been a little bit unfortunate is just this, what I call low costs at all costs. That seems to be the general philosophy that people in America have taken, is just buy whatever you can for as cheap as you can, irrespective of quality, irrespective of ethics. And that might work in the short term, but it does not work in the long term. This explains the rise of things like high fructose corn syrup, which helps explain things like obesity. Influenza comes from the whole big ag factory farm complex that's out there, fast food, cheap processed food. All of this is largely the product of this philosophy of just give me a low cost. I don't care about quality. I don't care about health. I don't care about ethics. You see this in the investing world with ETFs. And in general, this philosophy has promoted an ignorance and turning a blind eye to some major issues in the world today. I think a lot about human rights along supply chain. One of the things that's been illuminated is the treatment of Africans in China. There's a lot of them who go and work there, and these are just some different tweets shared by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Ghana and Uganda, where they're calling on China to treat these people humanely. Again, we have to consider what we're patronizing and what we're supporting here. There's probably going to be a multi-year renaissance of manufacturing that now begins outside of China. Now, the question I posed here is, will the US and the world regard this as a Pearl Harbor moment? So, of course, Pearl Harbor was when the attention of the US was captured in World War II, and it changed the world very dramatically. Now, I don't mean here responding in a military way. We advocate peace and peacemaking, but it is likely that what will happen as a result of this is people will want to bring onshore the new production of automation in factories. Theme 3, rethinking education. We badly need greater investment in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Right now, the typical secular university is getting weirder and weirder, promoting the wrong agendas. Having been at some of these places myself, I can say that you are indoctrinated into very unbiblical ways of thinking. Even some of the majors that people choose, comic book studies, puppetry, gender studies, things that are bizarre or even antithetical to biblical values. One of the things that we offer is computer science and human biology. I mean, these are two fields that if you were to embark on today, I think would be excellent ways to make an impact in the world today. This is just showing how much, if you look at graduate studies in the US, the percent of graduate students that are international. I did a master's in electrical engineering many years ago, and this is my experience as well, is that the vast majority of those students are international, and we don't have very many people who want to study these fields domestically. Theme 4 is preparing for the fallout of these mom and pop businesses, restaurants, and hotels. This was a publication from a CDC journal where they studied very carefully a particular restaurant in China, and the first patient who had the disease is patient A1 here, and you can see in circles are all the people who caught the coronavirus from this individual. So you can see at table A, where he or she was sitting, you can see the people over here got it, over here and over here, and then behind this individual, these three people got it, and then clear over here, these two people got it. And these are pretty scary diagrams that are going to change the ways that a lot of retail businesses especially function. And this means that there's going to be a whole reconfiguration of what it even means to be a retail business here. We have a business major at Sattler. I'm excited about how our students are learning and thinking about how this new economy is going to emerge. Theme 5, low oil prices. So this is a kind of a humorous quote from Mark Goncloff, who said it's pretty tough for the average humanoid to get too worked up about oil prices collapsing. Oh no, gas will be cheap, and oil companies and brutal dictatorships will go broke. How do we stop it? Asked no one ever. This is a major disruptor to the economy and the world as we know it. When you are under $40 to $50 per barrel of oil, a lot of companies are going to go bankrupt, and a lot of governments in the Middle East are going to become insolvent. This almost certainly is going to lead to rising instability in the Middle East, which is already the case, which means more refugees. I see this as a major opportunity for evangelism and showing Christian love through all of this. There's also, even in a more pragmatic way, with respect to business, upgrading the U.S. electrical grid as more people go onto electric vehicles. We want to be prepared for this. And I would say particularly thinking about this as an opportunity for evangelism. Theme 6, the strong get stronger and the weak get weaker. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide other than to show what happened after the financial crisis, where a small number of companies here in the auto sector got a lot stronger, and many companies that weren't as nimble, weren't as disciplined, they ended up crumbling. So speed and discipline is how the resilience stand apart. And these are things that we strongly believe in teaching, is how to think well and clearly about business decisions, about how to make good scientific decisions, and thus how to succeed in the world that we're moving into. Theme 7, the rise of pornography, addiction, and distraction. This is a very sad slide that I got from a child trafficking organization that I subscribe to. And this is showing year over year change in pornography web traffic. And you can see how it's been growing. This only goes through the end of March. It's been growing since then. About how many more people today are, because they're at home, because they're staring at their computers, they're getting into highly addictive, very dangerous and sad materials like pornography here. This is an opportunity for us to be a witness and to go out and tell people, hey, we have the solution through God and what he can do to change your life there, to be free from these addictions. I would love for us to continue to be ahead of this. This is something that we talk a lot about at Sattler, and we encourage each other in our weekly journey groups to be free of pornography and to walk lives of purity and holiness, but to now realize that we're going to be even having more opportunity to be lights in a very difficult and damaged and diseased world. There's a book that we talk a lot about at Sattler that I've mentioned, and Aaron Griffith as well has mentioned, called Deep Work. It's a great book. The thesis of the book is that the world is becoming more distracted and less able to focus itself there. And if you have that skill, you're going to be a very valuable person in the world that we're moving into now. I completely buy this thesis. I highly recommend this book. It's on a list of books that I recommend all of our Sattler incoming students read before they come to college. All right, so in conclusion, new cases have flattened from COVID-19 and are now slowly declining. Many more people have been infected with SARS-CoV-2 than previously thought, which is good news. It means that the case fatality rate is lower than previously thought. There is an aspect of bad news to it as well, in that it's a more infectious virus than we previously thought as well. But on the whole, I would say it's better news than not. This supports a steady and measured reopening of the economy while shielding the vulnerable. COVID-19 has accelerated pre-existing trends, exposed weaknesses in the global economy, and has created new trends. And these trends are huge opportunities for hardworking, disciplined individuals to rebuild a stronger, more virtuous economy for the global common good. I believe that Christians should be at the forefront of this. I see opportunities all around me here, and those of you at Sattler know how much I talk about these in terms of businesses, ways that we can be positioning ourselves well. And perhaps this is a time to break idolatries, perhaps even in a broad scale. I was reading just the other day someone who said that we have this tendency, America has this tendency to worship athletes. Well, guess what? There's no sporting events anymore. It worships its music concerts and the stars in that world. Well, those don't exist anymore either. That many people have been pursuing money and have lifted up money. Well, that whole world has been severely disrupted. This is a positive, because this fear that has been generated from this virus and the disruption are actually opportunities to bring our hearts and others to the throne of God, to break some of these idolatries and to drive us to what is truly eternal here. And so again, here at Sattler, these are very much moments that we want to seize here to bring glory to God and to his Son. So with that, I will close, and I thank you very much for your attention.